now.
Thank you, and hello everyone for joining us Global Technopolitics Forum's research team meeting on May 29, 2022. We have a very small group today, as usual. Unfortunately, Firuze has COVID, Eduardo has COVID, and as you all know, Greg has COVID. He's now almost out of woods, but nevertheless, we can see how it's spread now, how close to home it is. And I think those of us who haven't got COVID yet are outliers now. Otherwise, almost everyone. Paul, did you had it or you haven't?
No, I guess I'm an outlier, and I'm proud of it.
And you want to stay that way. That's great.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
My whole life I've been an outlier, so this is par for the course.
Same here, same here. So yeah, I don't have much to report this week. I am writing an article on SplinterNet. Maybe we can discuss part of that article. One of the things I find quite interesting is that in the current crisis between Ukraine and Russia, the cyber has been pretty invisible. Part of it, I think, is clear. If you want to invade, then you need boots on the ground. Invasion is not about cyber, it's actually physical, and therefore you have to be physical. Nevertheless, Ukraine has been very active on virtual side, both in terms of information war and also in terms of internet war. And in terms of lobbying and bringing help. So I want to see how you guys do see it. Greg, how do you see this? Is this war has nothing to do with cyber, or is cyber the defense is really cyber oriented where offense is physical?
Like you, I'm sort of surprised. I'm surprised the Russians haven't done more against Ukraine in the cyber realm. It looks like Ukraine has been pretty effective at learning in hacktivists on their side, right? To do some, at least to be a nuisance. But I'm surprised. I really am surprised. You would have thought that the Russians would have tried to do everything they could to take down virtually all communication inside Ukraine, and you'd think they'd have been much better at it. Now maybe their communications are so interconnected that they can't do that, but I just don't know.
Mm-hmm. Any comments, Puran?
I mean, I agree with Greg and what he said. The Russian and Ukrainian things are pretty embedded. And therefore, if they do anything very adverse with Ukraine in the cyber, and they're going to really hit themselves. So they're not really doing it. And Ukrainians are pretty sophisticated when it comes to these skills. So they know that if they hit each other, they might be damaging, themselves pretty much more than their adversary. The second thing which I could probably say is that while the war is going on, there's a lot of technology being used by Ukraine and allies, both from Europe and US, to sort of see to it real time and putting drone and real time in terms of how Russians are bombarding or pummeling some of the cities in Ukraine, and real time pictures are being picked up and passed on to investigators and those who will really use it. I also saw another news item, which was again on CNN, where there is a private satellite company, which also services US government. They are picking up the pictures from Black Sea and trying to see to it that Russian ships are coming, is stealing the grain from Ukraine, loading that onto Russian ships and moving away. So, and those pictures are so vivid, so real, and real time, that Russians are really going to find it pretty hard to keep on lying and tell the world that they're not doing anything. So cyber and drone and technology that is all being used, but Russians are not using it against Ukraine because they know they'll be hitting themselves because they're totally embedded with each other. So this is a brief thing from my side, but cyber is definitely there. And that'll be used for fixing Russians and not really allowing Russians to lie. And they'll be finally declared thieves that they're stealing grain from Ukraine and loading it onto Russian ship and taking it away back to Russia. So Russians are doing whatever they have been doing, but they're being caught through technology, real-time monitoring, drones flying up, and this private satellite company, I'm forgetting the name, but they have been picking up real-time image and passing it on to those who will really need it. Yeah.
Cool.
No, well, maybe just two thoughts, maybe a little bit provocative, but is the fact that we don't see or hear or know too much about what Russia's doing in cyber a function of their cleverness or intelligence at using the technology. So, I mean, I got to believe that and there's been proof previously that they're pretty talented people in Russia who know very well how to
Yes.
take advantage of cyber warfare. So I can't believe that they're completely absent on the stage and they're not doing anything. You know, it sounds suspicious to me. And I wonder if it's because they're just much better at, and it's more strategic for them not to make much news about what they're doing.
I
And
agree
also,
with
I wonder too, I think Puran, your comments are definitely on target. I just wonder about, you know, the fact that there's this evidence, quote unquote, of Russians doing all these things. Do the Russians really care? I mean, their audience is really their domestic audience, right? And making sure that the people in Russia are on board with what they're doing. And so it seems to me that the government has done a pretty good job of handling maybe cyber, if we want to call it that, domestically in Russia, which is really maybe just as important for them as it is externally. And we've got plenty of people in the US who still think that the election, the most recent one, was stolen. And that's with all sorts of quote, you know, evidence, or that what we would understand as evidence, and they still don't believe it. So I can very well imagine that even if you have pictures, you show all these things about Russians doing all these, you know, whatever it might be, that there are plenty of people who still don't believe. So that's a matter of the value and strength of propaganda, which I think Russia has really done I don't know if I would call it a good job, but I mean, they've been very effective at it. So that blunts any evidence that people turn up from any sort of cyber work that they're doing.
Mhm.
I think I agree. I think that because their objective is actually to go and invade, therefore they need boots on the ground, and there is no need to reveal their capacities in terms of internet warfare. So information is slightly different, but they've been very active in terms of information war within their own territory, while Ukraine has done marvelous job in the Western world and in Ukraine. So I think they both have been very strong. But when it comes to internet war, cyber war, I think Russia is holding its cards close to themselves and not revealing their capacity. The other thing is their workforce is shrinking. A lot of experts are leaving. Also, their infrastructure has suffered. So we shouldn't forget those elements as well. Because of the boycotts, their infrastructure is degrading and suffering right now. So it has been hit to a certain point. Any comments, Greg?
No, just that it is a nice reminder that the main audience for Putin always is domestic, right?
Yes.
And he's done a good job so far, it seems to me, of, well, an effective, not good, but an effective job at controlling the narrative inside Russia. So that's starting to leak. You see some of these generals speaking out. And so it'll be interesting to see as time goes on. Militarily, they look like they're doing slightly better than before, but that's still mostly in the south and the east. Just looks like it is going to just settle into a kind of periodic fighting stalemate, huh?
And isn't their objective really south and east rather than Kiev and that other sides?
That's what they've sort of adjusted their objectives and to account for their relative lack of success. So I think now their objectives are mostly in the east and south.
Is it possible that was actually their original objective, where they're sort of settling? In other words, it's a better negotiating position if you try to take over or make it seem as though you're trying to take over more of the country. And then when you sort of harden your position around a certain part of the country where you already have some established base, then everyone sort of breathes a sigh of relief and says, well, at least they didn't, expect or go any further than this. But nevertheless, they've still controlled more territory than they had before, and it does send a message. So I think I'm being a little bit naive when I say this, and I think there were miscalculations made, certainly. But is it possible that, roughly speaking, that was the strategy from the beginning? It seems a little bit dumb because they've lost a lot of resources, including people, to do that. Just for maybe not a huge amount of gain, but it seems to me that there are a number of people. I don't know how much we should take the words of Mr. Kissinger, but it's like some people are saying, well, okay, let's just call it, a day and let the Russians have at least a little bit of territory, quote unquote, to give Mr. Putin an off ramp, and that's it, But in some way, that only encourages, it seems to me, and maybe it meets what the Russians perhaps expected to begin with. I don't know. I just mentioned that as a theoretical, but.
Yeah, I guess I still think that who knows? The answer is we don't know, but I still think that Putin expected that Ukraine's defenses would collapse, that maybe Zelensky would flee, he could appoint a puppet. That was obviously if you believe that was the wrong thing to believe, but it looks to me like that's what he did think, and now seems to be scrambling to decide what he can kind of settle for. At least Kissinger put on the table the idea that maybe the Ukrainians will have to make some territorial concessions. In the end, I suppose that's for the Ukrainians to decide. But I guess I get nervous when I hear sort of maximalist demands. Every inch of Ukrainian territory, and that this has got to be clearly a defeat for Russia. That seems like a recipe for escalation.
Yeah, one concern I have is I think Ukraine increasingly have group of very young individuals running the country. And I think their approach has become a bit bold, assuming that they can really win this war. What they have done is impressive, but I think some of their requests and requirements are very unrealistic. I don't know how you guys see it.
As this war rides on, Russians have had two objectives which were sort of moving parallel to each other. One was that you move into Kiev, let there be a chaos, kill some people, let the current president run away and put a puppet. And once you sort of control the capital of any country, the things begin to collapse nearby. And so that was more of a psychological stroke or calm military.
We lost you, Pra.
I think maybe that's Russian cyber work there.
Yes. We've been Zoom bombed by the Russians.
So one of the issues that I like to discuss is the sanctions and the way they impact internet. So as you guys know, after the sanctions started, group of engineers and internet governance groups reached out to US government and and asked them to clarify and ensure that the internet would remain intact and safe. So there was the additional clarification on sanctions and its exempt series of or certain aspects of internet. So they made sure that it won't impact the internet. But we really don't have guidelines. And I wonder how such a guidelines should come about. Guidelines that clarifies which aspects of internet we should be touched, which aspects should be respected. I don't know how it works, but some kind of UN article that clarifies that these aspects should not be touched in war or in any circumstances. It should be free from sanctions. It should be respected during the war. And what aspects could be messed around with. Anybody has any comments on how these sort of things will be formed and what are the mechanisms? What do we have at the moment? What do we need to have?
Well, you have the example of the Ukrainian request, which you talked about, Patty, to ICANN, and ICANN saying basically, no, can't do it. We can't do this. So the basic principle seems to me that the internet ought to remain open. And that doesn't mean people aren't going to try and close it for their own domestic audiences. We've seen plenty of that in lots of different places. And I don't know what there is to be done about that mostly, but the principle seems to be right, that basically it ought to remain open and sanctions shouldn't restrict the ability of people to communicate through the internet.
But which body would be responsible to turn it from just a private nonprofit saying, no, I won't do it, to a rule that should be obeyed by everybody, around the world, all the governments? What kind of, does it need to be a treaty from, I don't know, what mechanism we have for something like that? Let's say on nuclear, we had a mechanism that certain things should not happen.
Mm-hmm. But if we use that analogy, we can imagine a separate treaty entered into by countries that were willing to enter into it. You could imagine some UN action, perhaps, or you can imagine maybe some ITU. Is that the right place to do it?
I think any agreement needs to be multi-stakeholder.
Right.
I think recently US issued some kind of declaration principles and between US and Europe. And then now I think about 60 countries have signed that. But to what extent, what kind of body? I mean, I think that treaty could be between 60 people and maybe more and more countries will join.
Mm-hmm.
But again, this is not something issued by the United Nations, not respected by all countries. It's more within democratic, sort of lines.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
well, that's the one that I.
Yeah,
that's the one that I had heard of. I think that's what you were talking about, Patty, was there's been this second meeting of this organization that, right, and this time in Paris. I think the last time I was in the U.S. in Pennsylvania or something, I can't remember, but yeah, that was definitely more to harmonize, I think, if I understood correctly, internet regulations and conditions between the U.S. and EU principally. But it's not a global, agreement or a global organization or any sort of, doesn't have that intent, I don't think.
Yeah, that's not the one I'm talking about. That, I think, was a trade kind of agreement or a gathering with a cyber aspect to it. But there was another, I don't know what they called it, I don't remember. Months ago, I think, declaration in April 28, I think it was issued. So the one you're talking about, I think, is Transatlantic Trade and Technology Council, which took place in Paris. Yes.
Yeah. You're right. It's two different things. You're right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's one, but they both are working in the same ways. but these are mainly done by United States, and they're in those guidelines, and within democracies are joining to that. Beyond that, I haven't seen anything more international. So Puram, we lost you for a while. We thought Russians may be attacked.
Something sort of got me out of the net, and then I had to struggle for a while, but I could finally get to connect.
Welcome back.
So thank you very much, Greg. So what I was saying was the first sort of idea of the Russians were to hit the capital, kill some people here and there, create the chaos, let the current president run away, put your puppet, take the control. The second one is, if it does not really happen, because it's a pretty big city, the capital, millions of people live in, and then when you operate your men and women in military, in an urban warfare, it becomes pretty difficult for any army. And this is what really happened, and they realized that they can't really do it. And now they are really falling back onto the second alternative, which is try and do certain things whereby it could be sort of put together with Crimea and try and run a sort of bridge to Moscow and put your own people there, which are, Russians, but in Ukrainian sort of territory, and keep on doing things whereby they will continue to destabilize Ukraine. So that might really, this war might end diplomatically somewhere, somehow, but there'll be those elements within Ukraine who will act on behest of Russians and try and create the chaos, instability. And it's not really going to be easy for Ukrainian as things are really going to grind up. And whatever Henry Kissinger said, it seems to have some kind of resonance within American establishment as well. So it might be something said by him, but it is not something said by him in a very casual way. So there is some sort of a plan behind it. What is that plan? How will it really roll out? Has to be seen, but what Henry Kissinger said might find some resonance and might play out in some sort of a modified plan going forward. I mean, this is what I feel is a reading which everybody is getting into it now.
Yeah.
Is there common agreement on what end the war actually means?
Yeah, no, I don't think there is.
Yeah, I mean, that seems to be that's a lot of open space there about what constitutes, the end, quote unquote, of that. I would think the Ukrainians, just like you were saying, probably maybe have a very different idea of what end of war means, compared to, in comparison with the US, for example, or some of the other parties who are involved. But I wonder if that's something that needs to be sort of clarified a bit before anyone can think about what the end might be.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think territorial concessions will need to be made. Russians will not stop at anything sort of concession which they will need to get, which will be territorial concession, which will further solidify them alongside, Crimea and Donbass, and then they will try and get into Moldova. And, they will not really stop at where they are. They will need territorial concessions to be given by Ukrainian, no matter what they say. And ultimately, diplomacy will play or start playing from that point on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, anyway. So is there anything anyone wants to report today?
I had written to you, Pari. I mean, there is CHOGM happening in Rwanda, and that's going to happen towards the end of June. And I'll be happy to attempt a little piece about it, because we're really going to talk about climate, cybersecurity, health, and so on and so on forth. And Commonwealth is about 54 countries, and they fall into every continent.
Mhm.
And this is going to be happening in Rwanda after three thrice they revised the venue and it could not happen because of COVID-19, but they are finally going to meet in Rwanda towards the end of June. And if you would be sort of fine, I can attempt peace, which could be ahead of Chogam, where they will have heads of governments coming and meeting. And then they also have civil society wing called Commonwealth Foundation. So both the things are really going to happen in Rwanda. And since it is Rwanda, Africa, this war going on, food crisis going to happen in Africa, because Ukraine produces roughly about 80 million metric ton of grain, and they need only 20 million metric ton. And the rest of the 60 million metric ton is exported and largely to Africa, which feeds roughly about 500 million people. So if Ukraine is in war and things are not really happening, Africa is really going to bear the brunt of food insecurity in a very, very different way, on a very, very different scale. And therefore, I'll be happy to sort of put a little thing and show it to you. And if you find it okay, you could carry it. And secondly, I'll be sending you this private sector development cooperation piece in a day or two. I'm already through. And climate one, I'm totally revising and I'm trying to sort of title it as making the sense of climate diplomacy. So
Fantastic.
These two things from my side, please consider and let me know if you want me to write something about Chogam happening in Rwanda.
It's just one thing, Puran. As you know, we are technology and geopolitics. So as much as you could, in whatever you're writing, emphasize or at least refer to technology as well.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay.
Paul, anything you want to report, you want to discuss?
Nothing immediate, but I just am wondering, about Biden's recent visit to Asia. And whether there's maybe something there to dig into. I mean, now that that's sort of becoming a little bit clearer what some of the ideas and strategy could be. It seems to me that maybe there's something there to focus on or to bring out that might be of some interest.
Mm-hmm.
One of the points, Paul, which I would like to really pick is that when Biden was in Japan, Chinese and Russian military jets were flying into that territory. While everything else was happening, North Korea, this Korea, that Korea, but it was something pretty weird to me to find that while Biden was there, meeting with 4 heads of different 4 countries, India, Australia, Japan, and he himself, and these 2 combined military, people are flying the jets in that territorial airspace. I think, that is something which looks very, very, difficult to imagine. How could these 2 countries come together and try and fly their military jets into Japanese airspace? And it was reported, and it is out in the public domain. And that is something which might be sort of dug into a little deeper, more from security and more from the point of view of intent of these 2 countries coming together and flying the jets into Japanese airspace while these, 4 heads of governments are sitting and talking about Quad and whatever it was. So I think that'll be the kind of response which might really be taken to write something about connecting Biden's trip to Asia and playing that event out, and then, sort of interpreting what that might mean, in geopolitics terms, in terms of why it happened. And I perhaps feel, and there's a hunch, if nothing else, Chinese will be looking at Taiwan. And Biden said that, he will be ready to confront Chinese militarily in case they were to, go and attack or invade Taiwan. So that was a kind of a trailer with these two people came together to fly the jets into Japanese airspace and tell Biden that, look, it won't be easy for you. And so I would be very, fine and open if that kind of a view could be taken in view of what Biden said about Taiwan and then what really happened. And it was happening in terms of Quad meeting and everything else. So it was out and out security. And it was also to sort of give a statement to these four heads of the governments that, look, don't really take everything so lightly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Greg?
It's a very complicated outcome, isn't it? Because on the one hand, you have the Taiwan statement, which probably was the right thing to do. In any case, Biden said it before. Then, as you say, we're on the jets while the Quad was meeting. Then there's Biden trying to basically create more partnerships without going back into TPP, because that's become a dirty word in American politics. So it was a little bit of tap dancing, huh? With a pretty complicated outcome. I think on the whole, probably a positive outcome from the US perspective, but a quite mixed one, huh?
Mm-hmm. And the declaration that they issued on Future of Internet on late April this year, it was on Zoom. One interesting part was that they invited Taiwan and Fedora from Ukraine as well. So, yeah.
What's your take, Party? I was sorry to interrupt you. No, I was just curious. I mean, as far as sort of the focus and areas of attention, now that there's a change in the Australian government, something looking at, what their technology strategy and policy is, sort of looking at that in a more concentrated way and what impact that has for either the region or even, with, looking at how that impacts or has any effect on what the US is doing. But I have to assume that, I haven't, in all the discussions about the change in government and new thoughts and new policies, I haven't heard much talk about the technology part. But it seems to me that might be something interesting to concentrate on or delve into a little bit more and try to think about what the effects or impact might be.
Yeah, they certainly, New Zealand and Australia signed to this declaration on Future of Internet. So they're signatory to that, where lots of other countries didn't. So, but beyond that, I really don't know. It's interesting to look into it. Okay, any comments from anybody? Any reports, anything anyone wants to discuss? Greg?
I think it's been a good conversation.
Yeah, okay. In this case, I look forward to receiving your articles, Puran, and any comments, anything from Paul. And meanwhile, wish you all a wonderful week ahead. And I see you next week. Thank you for being here.
Have a good week.
Yeah, take care. Yeah.
Bye.
Bye-bye.